It is the year 2472, and the Earth has suffered a great calamity. Hundreds of years of popular culture have vanished. Without the sacred films and text for guidance, civilization is devoid of anything cool. Then, 3 incubation chambers are unearthed, and from within, men from the time of the great blockbusters emerge. Now, through highly interesting conversations, they share invaluable insight about what once was. The movies, the shows, the comics, toys, and books. This is
the Hyperspace
Podcasting in the 25th century.
Today we are going to go back. We're going to go way back to a time that may be incomprehensible to some people, to a time before video games. That's right. Wow. There was a time when people were forced to sit in the same room and talk to each other. But now we are going to discuss the dawn of the video game. We were there when the obelisk first appeared, and we jumped around it and threw feces at each other as we hooted and hollered. We are going to discuss what it was like to see the games begin to change into our adulthood.
I think it's only fitting that we, you, Jared, Mike, myself, members of the very first podcast in the interweb,
yes,
tells the story of being the very first generation to have video games in our own homes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something they can't take away from us.
We own that.
Yeah,
but we're going to share it with them. We're going to share it. We're not going to be selfish.
No.
We're not going to keep the experience to ourselves.
That's why we entered the incubation chambers.
We're going to invite them to step inside as we recollect, reminisce.
Yeah, got to let them know.
And blossom into what it is now. So join us.
Those are beautiful words.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I have tears in my eyes. But before we get there, before we go down that rabbit hole, I'd like to tell our audience about a story that I remember so very well about Mike and a certain video game. Mike, this was in the year 2002, 2003, thereabouts. Mike lived in Florida, as did I. I was going over to see him. We were going to watch a movie or something. And I arrive at his front door. I knock. No one comes. I think I even rang the doorbell. No answer. So I start to listen, and I hear this muffled... And I thought, what is going on in there? And it got louder, and, I know Mike doesn't like his business out there, but there was massive obscenities. Massive. I mean, that would make a sailor blush. There was... And I'm hearing this outside, standing on the porch.
It could have been anything. Were you worried?
I know. I was like, well, what is wrong with him? He's out of his mind. So I took my cell phone out, and I called him. And and then so...
2002. What kind of cell phone? I'm just curious. Were you flipping out?
Oh,
there?
man, no. This was like a straight up like a Nokia.
Yes.
Like not a flip phone, but like
just
a little
solid
blue Nokia. Yeah, it was
right.
It was no good.
Right
but anyway,
back to the door.
I called Mike, and then the house goes silent. He picks up the phone. He goes, "Hello?" I said, "Hey, man, what is going on in there? It sounds like you're wrestling a bear or something." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't even hear you." I was like, "I know, because you're right in the middle of bear wrestling." And so he comes to the door, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" I was like, "Nothing. I just came over to watch a movie. What are you doing?" "Ah, man, I'm playing this Lord of the Rings Two Towers game, and I'm trying to shoot the Uruk-hai who's coming to blow up Helm's Deep. And I keep missing him, and I can't." And then he starts getting agitated. He goes, "And I can't deal with it. I can't get him. He always gets by me." So I sit down and watch him play, and the agitation grows again. His face turns 17 shades of purple. The swearing begins, throwing things. And I say, we probably just need to take a break. Let's go watch a movie or something. Let's go get something to eat. Let's get out of here. And he's like, "Yeah, I think maybe that's for the best." But that's Mike's experience. That's one of my favorite Mike stories ever, is just hearing him almost destroy this house, screaming and hollering and not hearing me at the door because of a video game. And that's the kind of effect video games can have on people.
Well, I'm going to follow that up with a real quick story that goes along the same lines. Is when me and my wife were first living together, Resident Evil 4 came out. And I love the Resident Evil games. And I was playing it one night, and she walks out in the living room. She'd been in bed, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just playing this game." And she goes, "Well, it doesn't sound like it's very fun."
Because you were going ape.
Yeah, I was doing this. My big thing to do was like, well, that's not fair. Oh, that's fair. That was my big thing I would say.
Mike, another story about Mike is he likes to talk to things that can't talk back to him, like inanimate objects. I've tried to put together desks, entertainment centers with him, hook up electronics. He always ends up talking to them going, "Hey, why don't you just work? I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to work. I don't understand this." But this has been another segment of sharing Mike stories. But this is a good one today, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a trip down memory lane for a lot of you. Maybe a lot of you, it's going to be the first time you've heard about these things. But that's why we're here. Isn't that right, Matt?
You're absolutely right. I was fascinated by all your stories. And I think we should get the whole thing started.
Let's do it.
With a little news.
News from the interwebs.
Today on News from the Interwebs, we've got some exciting news for fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Taika Waititi, the director of Thor Ragnarok, also the actor behind Korg, is returning to direct the next installment in the Thor series. Gentlemen, I think this is good news from the interweb.
I think it's the best kind of news. I was really excited when I heard this today.
Well, they struck gold with Ragnarok.
Did they ever.
I think they realized that.
You know, that movie in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, that might be my second favorite Marvel movie ever.
Yeah, it's top 5 for me easily.
It's so funny and it's so well written. It's just perfect. It's the best kind of movie.
I love the soundtrack, the 80s synthesizer.
Oh, it's great.
Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fantastic news, and I wonder how this is going to play into Thor's involvement in the next Guardians of the Galaxy movie, if at all.
It sounds like Thor will be first.
Well, I don't know. They haven't really announced when this is coming out, but as we record this, the San Diego Comic-Con is coming up. Marvel has a huge presentation where they're expected to unveil the next slate of films. So I guess we'll see then kind of where it falls.
I'm really excited. I can't wait to see what he does with the next movie. I was so far behind in the Marvel movies. I was doing the super catch-up. You remember when I was talking about this, Jared? I was so far behind in the movies just because I got busy being a dad with new kids, and I just stopped going to the movies and seeing all the movies.
Yes.
That I was scrambling to catch up before Infinity War.
Yeah.
And burning through movies whenever I could. This sounds awful to say. At the time, I had 2 young children. My third child wasn't here yet. At night, I would secretly pray that my kids would want mom to take them to bed, because then I'd grab my phone on Netflix and work through the movies. I did like Guardians 2 that way, which is a great movie also. Both Guardians are great. I got to Thor Ragnarok, and I wasn't overly excited to see it. I hadn't heard much about it. I didn't pay much attention. And I wasn't a super fan of the previous Thor, but I started it, and from the very start, the opening scene, I'm like, this is brilliant. This is the best. And I would look at the baby monitor and pray. I'm like, just stay awake a little longer in there, kids. Come on. Don't fall asleep yet with mama. Just stay awake. And then, they'd fall asleep, and I have to turn on because then we'd have to watch like Friends or something like that.
Man.
So I would piecemeal the movie. I think I watched it over the course of like 3 weeks. I finally got through it. And
holy cow.
But it was great. And then I watched it all the way through and I've watched it probably 10 times since because it's such a good movie. Yeah. But Thor Ragnarok is just, I recommend that to everyone who's never seen a Marvel movie. I'm like, just go see this one. Listen, you don't have to see any other Marvel movies. You don't have to know any backstory. Just go watch and have fun.
No, I can understand.
Because it's such a fun movie to watch.
That could be entertaining on its own. I mean, Jeff Goldblum, good grief.
Oh my goodness. The absolute best. I mean, what a casting choice. He's so great. He's so perfect in that role.
Yeah.
He's so weird.
I remember Mike saw it before I did, and he was like, man, you just have no idea what you're in for.
Well, when I first heard that he was directing Thor, I was a bit concerned because the work I was familiar with him was What We Do in the Shadows, which is a really, really great movie. It's really funny. If you haven't seen it, it's like, to me, it's like a must-see movie. And of course, it's got Jermaine Clement in it. Maybe he'll show up in the next Thor. So, I didn't know what to expect, obviously, because he's like a small filmmaker. But at the same time, Marvel, that's the well that they seem to go to, and they've had a lot of success with. Like Jared said, I saw it before everyone else. I saw it on opening night, and I was just blown away. I was telling everyone, I was like, you guys are going to love this movie. I try not to say that because usually you build up people's expectations that you can never really match that, but I really felt confident that people were going to love Thor. I mean, I took my family to see it, and my sons aren't really big Marvel fans, and my wife, it's very hit and miss, but we went and we all had a blast when we watched it, and it's just like a really fun movie. And it's just also, it's different. It's got a different feel to it, but it still fits. And and I really loved deliberate homages to Jack Kirby and his artwork. I mean, that thing screamed Jack Kirby, and that was sort of like, he did a lot of that science fiction-y stuff when he was with Marvel. So
yeah, he illustrated Thor.
And I didn't expect him to be back, because he just seemed like the kind of filmmaker that sort of just like does a thing and then moves on. And, it was really exciting to hear him come back.
I really feel like Marvel took note of that movie and really kind of tailored their writing a little more, I wouldn't say comical, but a little more tongue-in-cheek after that. Not that Marvel wasn't entertaining or funny to watch before, but I really felt the movies that came out after Ragnarok were really trying to incorporate a lot more.
Yeah, they had the same kind of tone.
Yeah, exactly. They were trying to make it a little more fun.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they've struck a great balance of that, crowd-pleasing entertainment with,
but I think they really
big stakes.
Yeah, they've got some good horses in their stable right now, and Taika Waititi is doing a great job. I can't wait to see what he does. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really excited.
Although I would say the commentary track he does on Thor Ragnarok is probably one of the worst commentaries
really?
of all time. Yeah, because it's cute though. I mean, it's not. There's not.
Does
a
he
lot
sound
of
just like Korg when he does it? It's like,
no.
all right,
What
he's
happens?
With you next?
He seems bored with the commentary, and he's just sort of like, here's a scene where we had Chris Hemsworth dressed up like Thor, and then about 3/4 of the way through, his daughter comes into the studio, and he just ends up talking to his daughter, and his daughter's like 3 years old.
Yeah, to be fair, he just might not care about that stuff.
No, obviously he doesn't.
He obviously caught the heart and the spirit of what those movies are supposed to be anyway. They're supposed to be fun. They're supposed to be entertaining.
Well, I think, too, you got to give a lot of credit to Chris Hemsworth because, his character was like an Adonis, and, he sort of slowly devolved into kind of an oaf. Not like a moron or anything, but he just slowly changed, and it seemed like him as an actor was just totally fine with it, especially what they did with him in Endgame.
If you look at you're right. If you look at the first Thor movie, he was definitely a godlike kind of persona, and they really made Thor quite relatable in Ragnarok, and from that point on, he was a very relatable character to just you and me.
Yeah.
And they made him very vulnerable, and fantastic stuff, starting with Ragnarok.
Yeah, Ragnarok, if you're watching the movies in order, it's kind of a great, appetizer for Infinity War.
Oh, no, definitely it's a straight lead-in. But also, the Thor movies, while I enjoy them, were probably my lesser favorites of the Marvel movies, but I think Ragnarok is an instance where the sequel makes the predecessors stronger.
Yeah,
like that's a and I think you got to include the Avenger movies as part of the Thor story.
Oh,
and if you watch the Thor movies and the Avenger movies, you got like a really great arc for Thor, and it has a lot to do with family and with his brother. His brother went through an arc. I mean, I think that stuff is really great.
And we know, of course, spoilers here, but as we know, Thor is a little more unchained leaving Endgame, so he's not as tied down to be in charge of the Asgardians. So, I'm kind of curious to see where he is in the mercenary world out there. I'd like to see what Thor... I'm looking forward to seeing what Thor's next chapter is.
All right, so that is definitely some good news from the interwebs.
Random access memory.
I've got a question for you. What was your first car?
My car was my grandmother's car.
Did you share it with your grandmother?
Yes. And that was
You did?
Yeah, she's a very social person. She went out on weekends. No, that's not true at all. She lived in Pennsylvania, and my dad drove up to get her car and to bring it back. It was a 1978 Pontiac Grand Le Mans, and that was back when gas was still reasonably priced.
Oh, yeah.
And my dad attached a hitch to it because he used it to pull his fishing boat, and he took the bumper covering off, and when he mounted the hitch on, he didn't put the cover back on. So it was just the bare bumper. But also, I was notorious for locking my keys in my car, so I kept a coat hanger in that bumper so that I could get to it whenever I locked my keys in my car.
Did your friends know about this trick too?
Probably. But also, I had another friend who gave the car a nickname because of its size and age, and it was nicknamed the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, of course. What was the color?
It was gold.
Gold.
Oh, gold.
Yeah, and the upholstery on the ceiling,
The headliner, yeah.
it was all rotting out, so it hung
Yes.
low. But so my parents took some pins, multicolored pins, and pinned it back to the ceiling. But it's still like I don't guess the air conditioning worked because we had to drive with the windows down. So all that fuzz would fly around the car, and you would know. I remember getting out of the car, and my friend had fuzz all in his hair. So anyway, so that's what happened when you rode with me. You had fuzz in your hair. Anyway, so that was my first car.
Sounds like it sounds like you're crying.
I don't know why I got so tickled over that, but anyway, yeah. So people would get out of my car and they'd have like little fuzz all over in their hair. So anyway, yeah. But I was like I was one of the first people to have his own car, so people got stuck riding with me.
Yeah, they didn't care. It's like, okay.
How long did you have the car for?
I had it. I think I got. We traded it in. I was in college. I think probably 90. Right after I got out of college, I got my second car, which was a red S10 Chevy pickup truck.
The S10, yes.
Which got stolen at the East Town Mall parking lot.
Because you left the keys in the car, didn't you?
He found the coat hanger in the bumper.
Well, that's a good first car.
Oh,
that's a
man.
good first car.
Good grief.
Mine was I had a 1987 silver Oldsmobile Delta 88.
Okay.
And this I think my dad got this for me and my brother because I have a twin brother and we shared this car. Which let me tell you the complications of sharing a car
with a
in
twin.
high school. Yeah, with your twin, it's not easy. There's a lot of fights about who got the car on the weekends.
Wow.
I think my dad got that car from his company's motor pool. They were like getting rid of it, and I think he got it for a couple $100. I think with the intention of like, here's a car that you can learn on, and then maybe we'll look to get something else down the road. But it never happened. That car was mine for a long time. And
did your brother eventually get his own car, and you kept that car?
I actually took that one to college, and he wound up getting an even worse car. But that car was its nickname was the Hoki-oon. It was HKIOON, the license plate. So everyone always called it Hoki-oon. This car was it was peppy. It had like a big 3.7 V6 in it that was way too over torqued for this car. GM made just a piece of junk out of this car. And it was quick for what it was, and it would break engine mounts every year. Every year, my engine almost fell to the ground.
Wow.
And when you're in college, you had no money, and you rolled your car in with, broken engine mounts, and you're like, I can't do anything about this except drive around with a crappy car that you don't want to accelerate too much because it hits your hood when you accelerate. But that car served me well up until I got out of college, and then it just started to die on me. Everything cascaded after, or one thing after another. The sensors were going, the water pump started to go. It was just on its last wheels, and I finally got rid of it. But I had that car for a long time.
So I think what's funny is you and your twin brother were sharing the same car. So when you were driving around, this must have caused mass confusion. Because, hey, Matt, you just sit there and staring at the traffic light. Matt, he's ignoring me, the jerk.
Are you suggesting that different people would get in the car not knowing who was driving?
No, I mean like if he was pulled up next to another car.
Oh, okay.
Because you knew
you.
people by their cars. Like you would, when you went to high school, you would be out and you would see someone's car you knew, and you knew that person was driving the car.
Yes.
That's true. It did happen a lot. I wore my name sweater a lot, so I was good.
Your name sweater.
But you know, sorry, my headliner would fall down too. I think I used pennies to pin that thing up. It was bad. By the time I got rid of it, it was bad. But I can't complain. It got me through high school and college, and that was my first car.
I mean, a free car.
And I have to tell you, my second car, which I was so excited to get, was a Chevy Malibu. The first year it came out, and that car was even worse than the car I started with. So, in terms of how bad of a service job
were
it
you
was,
were you driving that Chevy Malibu when I met you?
I must have been.
That was probably, but that was like 01, 02.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember driving around in that thing.
Yeah, it wasn't good. It was an embarrassment.
Wow. Well, you had a fairly short lineage of cars up until I knew you there.
That's true. Yeah, I ran to the ground. But I was happy to get rid of that Malibu too. Yeah. But no, that Delta 88, I have a picture somewhere. I photoshopped it into Mos Espa, and I just put it in the ghetto in Mos Espa, and to me that's kind of where that car in my mind wound up anyway. Okay. So I have a picture of it somewhere, and I'll post it when I find it.
Is that the one that you taped the standee of Riker to the front of?
I didn't tape that got taped to my car when I was in college. Somebody had found a cardboard standee of Riker that said, God, I can't remember what it said on it now. It said, "Assume command," is what it did. It said, "Assume command," and they had taped it to the front end of my car, and I couldn't see it. It had a long hood, and it folded over a little bit, and I really couldn't see it when I drove. And I'm driving around campus, like, for 2 days straight. I didn't know it was on my car, and everyone was just laughing and pointing at me. I kept having people yell "assume command" at me. I'm like, I don't know what that means. But I had Riker on my car for a while. That's among other things that
that's pretty
people
awesome.
in college found to put on it. But that was my car. What about you, Jerry?
My first car was a 1985 Dodge Colt hatchback.
A Colt. My grandmother had that car, though I think it was like an 80.
Oh wow!
But yeah, I know the Colt well.
Yeah, it was a 4-speed standard transmission, 4-speed, not a 5-speed. It had 4 speeds, no air conditioning, and my mom had run into it like in 1988 with her van, and we have never gotten. It was some front end damage that we never bothered to get repaired. So I was rolling in like this beat up, black hatchback with no air conditioning. It had no radio in it or anything. And so what I would do is my sister had this like pink boom box. It was called a Sidekick, and I would take this thing and just kind of throw it in the back seat so I'd have play cassettes on it on this pink boom box in the back seat of my Colt. And I would call it, my friends would all call it Sidekicking. Hey, are we going to be can I bring some tapes? Are we going to be sidekicking today? I was like, yeah, man, the Sidekick's got fresh batteries. Let's do this.
And the struggle was real, man. Kids won't even understand.
Yeah, but I was happy to, my dad taught me to drive that thing, being a clutch and everything. I learned how to drive in a graveyard. He took me to a cemetery to drive around on the roads in the cemetery, in typical dad joke fashions, because he knew I wouldn't kill anyone in the cemetery. So there was some frustrations learning the shifter and the clutch and all that. But, well, I still drive a stick to this day. So
Yeah, that's a good talent to have. I learned when I was 17 to drive a stick shift.
Yeah.
Luckily.
My dad tried to teach me on our Datsun, and I remember my dad is not a very even-tempered person, and I'll never forget this image of me in the car, and he's in the passenger side.
Like jerking around.
And, I mean, it was like we were in a rocking horse. I mean, and it was just, and I was, you have that look on your face
Yeah.
where you're like,
like,
I don't know what to do. And I
Yeah.
look at him, and he's sitting there, and he's got his can that he's spitting in because he dips. And, I mean, I couldn't believe it because I look at him expecting him to, like, be ready to kill me. And he just, like, real calmly goes, all right, no, take it out of gear. And I'm, like, rocking this car like crazy. So, but that...
I have a vision of License to Drive when he's doing the drive test. You remember that movie with Corey Haim? The guy has coffee, so if you spill my coffee, you fail.
I remember
That's
that.
what I think of.
Anyway.
Wow. That's
Driving stick, though, I learned to drive stick when I was 17. I was in Aruba, believe it or not. I was
Aruba.
I know I was. I went down to the strip when I was 17, and I was with my buddy. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and my buddy's family. Her brother was my buddy, and they rented a Toyota stick shift, which would never have been allowed in the United States. This was a definite, like, Toyota made it for other countries kind of car, and it was a stick shift, and neither of us knew how to drive, and their mom's like, okay, drive us to the hotel. We're like, okay. So we learned on the fly, and what I was going to say is that was probably the best way, because I remember my father tried to teach me to drive stick, and there was something frustrating about that process. But when you have to learn and it's just you in the car, you learn pretty quick.
Yeah, when my Pontiac was an automatic, but my S10 was a stick, and I learned to drive because I would take it to work, and at night I got off real late, and I just drive around halls because it was completely empty, and that's how I learned to drive a stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you learn by yourself. That's the best way. So anybody listening who can find a stick shift these days, just take it out. Don't bring anybody else. Just go out there, and I guarantee within an hour you'll be driving stick
Yeah.
for the rest of your life.
Man,
But
that was
those are our first cars, guys.
that was a good topic.
I was just curious.
Man, good stuff.
You're a starship captain in an asteroid field. Blast the with your lasers or put up your shields. As a missile commander defending your city. If you're not quick enough, they'll show no pity. The invaders won't stop us from the skies they drop.
Just keep coming.
3 out-of-this-world games from Atari, the #1 video computer system with more games than any other.
Everyone's gone Atari. The #1 video game.
If you were a child growing up in the late 70s or early 80s, you were the first generation to have a video game console in your house.
That's true.
I think it was 1983. My dad brought home the Atari 2600. It had Pitfall, and I think he had Pac-Man. And that was my first time ever playing video games, which was amazing because I'd never been to an arcade. I had never played Pong. I had never played any video games. I was never at a friend's house playing it. So it was the brand new experience of playing that in your house. And that was one of the most amazing times I can remember as a child, is when I first played Pac-Man and Pitfall.
I was going to say, I can't remember if I think I knew arcade games from like restaurants and stuff like that. I'm not sure, but I do remember when I was young, my grandmother had Pong.
Your grandmother had Pong.
Yeah, well, my uncle was like 8 years older than me, so he was like 9 or 10 when this would have happened. So they bought it for him, and my uncle was like my older brother basically, and they had Pong, and I remember playing that. And that was my first exposure to a home video game console. And I think the game I liked playing the most was when you were the two cowboys shooting at each other, and you had the wagon scrolling vertically in the middle of the screen. I think that's the one I like to play.
What was that called? Gunfight or something?
I don't know. So I can't remember, sort of what came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know if it was the console I was introduced to first or an actual arcade game.
Well, I remember distinctly there was a friend of my mom's. This lady had kids, and it's the first time I saw a video game. It was the 2600. I don't remember if they were playing, I think it was Space Invaders was the game, but it was crazy. because you're playing a game on your television.
That was unbelievable.
And it was mind-blowing at that time. You just have no concept of seeing that for the first time.
And it's funny when you hear those sounds and the music from those old 2600 cartridge games now.
Yes.
It's so distinct, and it's such a memory hook that comes back. It's like there's nothing else that sounds like that. There's no other games, there's no other movie sounds, television sounds. It's the most unique, proprietary kind of memory sound that you'll ever have are those games. And they were something really kind of special. They weren't complicated. They were fun. They were simple. You got a little story. Some of them came with comic books, if I recall. You just went and you had fun, and it was amazing. And your mind, in my opinion, at that age, my imagination in those simple games was as expansive as my mind was when I'm playing Skyrim 10 years ago. Because it just goes with it, and you believe it, and you buy into it, because you had nothing else to reference. There was no other superior graphics out there. It was cutting edge, and it was cool, and it was new, and it was so much fun.
Well, it's like when you see the puppet dinosaur in Land of the Lost when you're a kid. That looks like a real dinosaur.
Yeah, that might as well have been Jurassic Park back then.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the same thing with video games.
Yeah.
It was like, wow,
We had
those squarish objects look like men.
we had no frame of reference. I mean, it was there, and it was awesome.
Man, you had a stick and a button
Yeah.
and
That's all
a
you
wood-paneled console on the floor.
Yes.
It was designer. It was very
That
chic.
that
You know,
worked
it was-
most of the time, and if it didn't, you had to take the cassette out and blow on it, and then shove it in at warp speed, and then hit the reset button 1,000 times. And you could flip
the
it.
reset button.
Jared, did you ever have the Atari 2600?
I did not have a 2600.
You
I
didn't
did
have a
not
2600?
No.
We did. I didn't either.
My friend Brian did.
Yeah.
But it was
I had a friend who had it, and I swear to you, I think every game that was made, they had it. I mean, you would go in their game room, and there was just literally cartridges strewn about all over the place.
Yeah.
And my friend, he beat all these games. I remember watching him play E.T., and that game's like notorious for being
wretched
and hard to play. And he was playing it. And of course, most of the time, my experience was watching him play games. Every now and then I'd get lucky. And he'd be like, okay, you can take a turn.
There wasn't many games out for the Atari system that you could win. Most of them would just go on forever.
I could never get past the alligators.
Which, by the way,
Pitfall.
I never was told that you couldn't win these games. That was just kind of handed it, and off I went. And
you never thought. I think it was just you never thought you could beat them.
No, I actually thought there was an end.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. I mean, there was some game like Pitfall. When I first started playing Pitfall, I knew I was so close to getting the end. And it was like right after that next lake. It was
Well, in doing my research for this episode, I looked up on YouTube the end of Pitfall.
There is one?
It has an end, and it's more lame than you can possibly imagine.
What is the end? I should YouTube it. Just tell me.
You jump across the final series of quicksand, alligators, and water traps, scorpions, fire, snakes, and Pitfall Harry freezes in mid-run, and it goes...
That's it?
And it freezes, and it's over.
Oh, no. I wonder how long it takes to get through that game then, start to
Yeah,
finish.
but you know what? I bet you anything, if you had got there when you were a kid,
you would have felt a sense of accomplishment.
You'd have been, yeah, right, got it.
Now, since we're talking about Pitfall, I will say Pitfall is my favorite 2600 game.
Yeah, mine too.
I don't know what it is. It has some kind of mystique about it. Even on the ROM emulators I play it on occasionally now. I mean, it is super primitive. It is, there's nothing to it. But something about it just grabs me.
Yeah.
And talking about my friend Brian again, he had such muscle memory of that game. He could turn away from the TV and play Pitfall for 2 minutes and not die. It was like a magic trick. It was truly impressive.
That is impressive. I'm impressed right now. They were just simple games. They weren't complicated. There weren't intricate story plots. There wasn't any kind of graphic content. It was just it was a fun, simple contest, and you could fill a good hour and just have fun. It was just like playing a board game, only much cooler, much more engaged.
Well, One of my favorite memories of ever playing a video game involved the 2600. When my friend, who I spoke about just a few minutes ago, I spent the night at his house one night, and he had this game called Star Raiders. And the game was like you were in a spaceship. It was sort of like Star Wars, where you're like a first-person perspective.
I think I know this game.
And they actually made like this little keypad.
Yes,
that
I
you could
had that.
plug into.
Yes.
And so when I spent the night with him, he had a little brother, and we were all sitting on either his bed or his brother's bed, and he was piloting the ship, and either me or his brother were controlling the keypad. And I can't even remember what you did on. I don't know if it was like you brought up shields.
It was
or something.
complicated.
And this was like late at night, and he would play the game, and then whenever the ship would start to explode, there was a beanbag next to the bed, and we would leap off the bed onto the beanbag and try to get onto it before the ship exploded. And we did that like all night long. I can't even believe like his parents didn't finally come storming in the bedroom and go like, "Go to bed." But to this day, like when I think of like having a fun game experience, that's still like the funnest I ever had playing a video game.
Yeah, sure. I remember playing Haunted House, which is not a great game, by the way. But I remember playing that like late at night, and it was in my basement when I lived in Connecticut, and it was my basement with the lights off. And that scared the heck out of me at that age. Did you play that game, Jared?
I never played.
You never played Haunted House?
You know they were
Is this 2600?
Yeah.
No.
They were making bootleg games for the 2600 at that time too. They made a Halloween game where you were Michael Myers.
Oh, really?
You mean back then?
Yeah, back then.
Wow.
Even back then, they were figuring out how to do this stuff.
You know, I remember it was Activision. If you guys remember the company Activision.
Yes.
To me, they were putting out some of the coolest fun games for the
they had
Atari
that.
back then. I had like Pitfall. I remember I played a pole position knockoff called Enduro by Activision, which was basically the same thing as pole position, which is a blast. And Enduro was funny. That's one of those games I figured there was an end. Maybe there isn't, and I have to research it, but it's just you go on forever, and the skyline continuously changes from like a sunset to daytime to evening to night, and you go through like snow, and it was really interesting in that regard. It wasn't. You look at it now visually, and you're like, that's ridiculous. But back then, that was impressive. Like, oh my god, I made it through another day.
What was the objective of the game?
You just race and get points by racing and not crashing.
Do you remember the arcade games where it was actually some plastic like sheet that was rolling?
Yes.
And you had like
yes.
your car was
Oh
superimposed over the. It was like a conveyor belt, and it was just rolling the landscape continuously.
That's terrible.
That was like a really old game.
That was very old. Which it's fitting that Mike would mention it.
Well, it's in the original Dawn of the Dead. One of the characters is playing it, so it'll always be.
That's
every
funny.
time I watch the game, I remember.
I've
that.
never seen that.
You know, the first time that I really noticed a disparity between what the 2600 was putting out as opposed to what was in the arcades was Pac-Man.
Oh yeah, that
Pac-Man
game stunk.
on the 2600 looked like a caveman painting of Pac-Man, and then the caveman wiped his feces all over it, and that's 2600 Pac-Man.
And that was huge. And I think the thing is, I don't know I don't think people are going to realize how big Pac-Man was. Like, it was like the Beatles of video games.
Yes,
like,
of course.
Unless you lived in that, you just won't believe. There was really Pac-Mania. I mean, it was insane.
Well, you know,
It was
Pac-Man Fever was a song. Like a
Jared, did you-
Pac-Man Fever.
Did you live in Knoxville during the
Yes.
World's Fair?
Yes, I did.
When I went to the World's Fair, they had these Pac-Man. Do you remember these Pac-Man tents? They were like little Pac-Man shops. You'd go in there, and they had some different Pac-Man games, and you could buy some Pac-Man stuff. But this was at the World's Fair.
Yeah, I don't remember this. But I mean,
Yeah,
it was 1982. I totally
so-
believe that it would be there.
So when I went to the World's Fair, that's where I wanted to go. I'd walk in the door and be like, "Where's Pac-Man?"
Where's Pac-Man tent?
Well, I mean,
Kinda good.
Pac-Man and even Miss Pac-Man, which was even more visually awesome.
Yeah, she had a pink bow.
Yeah, I mean, even though they were earlier on in the video game home console kind of timeline, if you look at Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man, even though that was earlier on in the video game timeline, it really focused on hand-eye coordination much more so than a lot of the games out there. And if you go back and play it now, even, I guarantee you'll think the same thing, that it is a really precise hand-eye coordination kind of
It's
activity.
still tough.
Yeah.
It's still a tough game. But I guess what I was trying to lead into with what Jared just spoke about is when it came out in the 2600, it was like a really big deal. Like, I remember seeing commercials on the TV like, Pac-Man's finally coming to the Atari 2600.
Have you played Pac-Man? It's the new video computer game everyone's talking about. And naturally, it's from Atari.
Have you played Atari today?
And
And then you play it, and it's like...
I know. It's like dong, 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 dong,
And
dong.
Pac-Man only turned side. He could only do profile.
Yeah, he would
wouldn't
never turn like into
upward
the,
or downward.
Yeah, he was always level, like horizontal. It was so dumb.
Yeah, but
But see-
that's the game that I remember my parents always playing is Pac-Man. I don't think
Yeah.
they played anything else, but they did play Pac-Man all the time.
Yeah, my mom, who's probably never touched a video game since when we had a Commodore 64 in the mid 80s. She was better at Pac-Man than anybody in our family. Like, she was getting up into like, I think she topped out at like the 20th key on Pac-Man. Which, you know, I still talk to her about it this day. I was like, I mean, you were like truly a Pac-Man wizard. She played it for like that summer and never touched a video game since then. We're going to evolve here from the 2600 because...
Well, yeah, I was about to mention after that, because Donkey Kong came out in the arcade, and that was a huge game.
Yes.
And then the ColecoVision came out, and my uncle actually got that. Although it had that really crappy controller.
Yeah, the
Did you remember
controller
that
was
controller?
terrible.
Yeah.
It was like a little knob.
Yes. It was
But he
awful.
got Donkey Kong. It looked just like the arcade.
Yes.
ColecoVision was
And I was like, whoa.
ColecoVision was an evolutionary jump from Cro-Magnon to Homo sapien
Yes.
at the time.
Yeah. Just having it look exactly like the arcade was such a big deal back then.
And if you had one, you were the man. I had one friend who had ColecoVision, and that person was the envy of everybody.
I don't think my uncle ever got another game after he got that. It was just Donkey Kong.
But
Donkey Kong?
ColecoVision didn't last long. The game generation for the system wasn't much, and it didn't last long. It had a big marketing push, I remember, but it fizzled pretty quick.
Well, that was the thing with Atari. The volume of games you could buy, it was just like a juggernaut. It just really wouldn't go away.
Yeah, and I remember it was a big deal once Atari started licensing other people to make games for them, because that like opened the floodgates.
See, we got the Atari 5200. That's the one we got. And it had, the controller was like a rectangular shape and had like a keypad, and some games came with different coverings that you could put on the keys so you hit specific keys.
Oh, yes.
But the thing about it was it had 4 rubber bubbles, 4 red buttons on either side, but they were rubber. And after you played it for so long, it was hard to get them to make contact. And you'd be playing and you'd be like putting a death grip on it, like jamming those buttons in there. But for a while, it was pretty awesome because we had Pac-Man for the 5200, and it looked just like the arcade game.
Yeah.
It was like playing the arcade game.
Atari had finally figured it out.
And then we got the Centipede, and we got the trackball that you could get to attach to
Oh
it.
yeah. Then you're just like in the arcade at that point.
I would say the first gaming system in my house was, I had to do research on this because it was this vague, undefined, like beige machine. The internet was helpful, and it turns out this thing was called, it was released by Sears, and it was called the Telegames Hockey Pong. But this was actually a gift from my grandparents to us sometime in the early 80s. And it came with this weird like paddle things, and the games were all variations on Pong. It was essentially all variations on sticks.
El Pongo.
Yeah, on sticks hitting a ball. That's they had like badminton. But it was Pong ripoff. I mean, it was easy to rip off Pong. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, apparently, Magnavox actually owned Pong, and they made a lot of money suing other game companies for ripping off Pong.
It would not surprise me in the least. But so that was the first gaming system in our house, and then
wow, that sounds like something you'd see on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Like Homer would bring home
Telegames Hockey Pong from Sears. And the Commodore 64 was like the first legit gaming system in the Talkstein home.
Yeah, I had the Commodore 128. And, when you think about it, I had only a console. I really wasn't, I played the console games only for about maybe 3 years before we got our Commodore 128, which had the same games for the 128 as the 64. And I just really never picked up a console religiously again. I wasn't a huge, like when Nintendo came out, I wasn't a big Nintendo fan. Even though my younger brother was, I stuck kind of with computers from that point out.
The PC snob.
You know what? Yeah, I guess I was. But the array of games that were available for the computer and what it lets you do was so much more expansive than a console was at that time. That changed the whole ball game.
Well, the last console we had was, the only one we had was the 5200. And I guess after a while we got tired of the controllers, and it just kind of got used less and less, and then packed away. And we didn't have anything because I got a Commodore 128, but it was years after it was pretty much being discontinued. I didn't have a console until the Nintendo.
There were some pretty great games that I played for the Commodore back in the day. I remember one of my favorites. It's called Mars Saga. And Mars Saga was like a real primitive RPG. You were Tom Jetland. I still remember the plot. You were Tom Jetland, and you crashed on Mars. You had to.
Did you have all your teeth?
Yeah, did you have implant teeth?
Exactly. He had implant teeth. He was smart. He had them pulled. And you had to go to the different towns in this little futuristic Mars and earn credits and earn skills and develop kind of like a crew posse and solve a problem what's happening on Mars. And all you really wound up doing was just getting all these different people in your group and murdering everybody. That's really all your purpose on Mars was. It was just to be a create havoc.
Did you ever have Impossible Mission? It seems like everyone I knew that had a Commodore had. You remember that game?
Yes.
Stay a while. Stay forever.
Oh, yeah. That's going to definitely be a sound drop.
Another visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever.
I got to look that one up. What was it called? Impossible Mission?
Impossible Mission.
No.
Stay a while.
You were just...
Stay forever.
And I never figured out how to play it. You just ran around these hallways.
Yeah, you just ran around these hallways with elevators, and there were these robots.
And you were this wispy, thin dude who was just
I could never figure out what the point was.
Never.
But it had this really rad, like, artificial speech that was kind of revolutionary at that time.
That thing is, like, ingrained in my memory.
Stay a while. Stay forever. It's really bad. But yeah, Impossible Mission, definitely had played that.
Nice.
Did
you guys ever play Crimson Crown? You ever heard of that? No. Crimson Crown was it's like one of these kind of adventure games. Pretty linear adventure game. You just had to make your north, east, south kind of decision making. But the artwork in it was featured everywhere at the time. Like if you opened up a computer magazine, it would show the artwork from Crimson Crown, and it was kind of like one of those pretty in-depth story plot games. And that's when they really started to take advantage of what computers could do for games versus just a basic kind of like simple kind of activity. It was much more cerebral, much more decision making at that point, and it was cool. I mean, it was neat. I spent hours playing some of these games. I played a text-based game called the Thriller series from a company called Code Writer. I mean, I spent weeks and weeks playing this game. It all was text-based, but it was cool, and it was a neat change from a console. It really kind of puts you in the game much more so than you just kind of doing an activity. You were almost in the game, and that's kind of like where computer games and then later console games evolved to anyway. You really...
Well, did you ever play Wasteland?
I think I did.
It was like a forerunner for what would become Fallout. It was a pretty fun game. I actually played that one all the way through.
I don't know when. I don't know when those games came out, but like I was playing a ton of those games in in college.
Talking about
in like
text-based games?
This one was basically, I mean, it had some graphics, but I mean, it was basically like you walk in a village, but in it you would like shoot people and they would explode. Like it would say, so-and-so explodes like a blood sausage.
I never played that, but that sounds awesome.
But that was what Fallout was based on. That's what they based that on.
Well,
but also, I tell you, I played a really cool, this was really fun. They made an Aliens game based on the movie for the Commodore, and it was like really fun game because it had like different, like, you know, one you had to go through a maze while the aliens were chasing you, and there was like at the end you had to control the lifter while the queen was like filled the screen in front of you. You had to use the lifter arm to try to grab a hold of her. But yeah, that was like at the time that was like the game opened up where you were in the ship and you had to fly down to the planet and you had to fly through the circles without, you know, going outside of them.
Okay.
I mean, that was really fun.
You know what's funny though, when you think back to the experiences that we had with video games growing up, I'm not gonna be one of those like, you didn't know the hardships, but I mean, when you're talking about like, you know, let's go back to when you first had your console games, and Jared, I'm sure Sears console extravaganza had the same issue. You had to have the special little box that you connected to the antenna screws in the back of your TV. It had a little toggle switch to let you go to TV to video game.
Game TV.
Yeah, and it sometimes it wouldn't work. Sometimes one of those little screws would or the connector points would break, and then you had to use like tin foil if you used foil back then to make it work. But there was all kinds of tricks. But that's how you got your video game onto the television back then. And then, of course, you go jump forward to the Commodore era with Commodore 64 and 128. You had these floppy disks with all these games on it. And it wasn't just like one disc. Sometimes it was like 15 discs.
Yeah, it was a lot of discs.
And sometimes you had to flip it over. And, I mean, it was a process. It wasn't just like turn on a game and play it. It was like you were about to commit to a process to get involved in this stuff. But it was all part of the fun. And it was still new and it's still cutting edge at the time, and there was nothing else like it, so it was, you know, you didn't think about it. But looking back,
you didn't know any different. You're
just looking back,
yeah, man,
it's just so funny to think about how many steps it took to do these things.
We jumped through a lot of hoops for not much.
You either put your TV on channel 3 or channel 4.
Yep, channel 3 or 4.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
I tell you, what's input? I don't know what input 3 is. HDMI, get out of here. No, channel 3 or 4.
I remember I took my Nintendo up to my grandmother's who lived in Pennsylvania. I was playing Super Mario on her TV, and it was just the whole time she was like worried that, now, is that going to burn in? I heard about burn in. I don't want it to burn into my TV. And I'm like, I don't think so.
Oh, man. How's your grandma know about burn in?
I have no idea, man, but she heard about it.
That's all it took.
Man.
Stuck in her brain, the burn in.
So you guys didn't have a Nintendo Entertainment System?
No, I did. Yeah, my younger brother had the Nintendo, and it was cool. I just, at the time, I was just much more, at that time, I was 6 years older than my younger brother.
Yeah.
I was still enjoying computer games. I just never kind of took to it. Even though I enjoyed those games and I've enjoyed a lot of the Nintendo games, it wasn't my thing. I didn't like jump on the bandwagon at the time.
That's surprising.
I remember I had just gotten a job at Burger King, and I had the option of using my money to get my driver's license, or I could go get a Nintendo. And the thing was, I was within walking distance of my job. And like Kmart. So I remember I walked down to Kmart.
Wait, Burger King or Kmart? What do you?
Well, Kmart was right next to Burger King.
So you had worked at Burger King and Kmart?
I guess the point is I was within walking distance of everything.
Okay.
So I had the option of getting a driver's license or buying a Nintendo. So I walked down to Kmart and I bought a Nintendo.
All right.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Before you tell me more about Nintendo, I have to ask. What was the best workstation at Burger King for you? Or what was the worst?
No. The best was when you made the burgers. Because you were just standing there, and you made the burgers. No one bothered you. The worst, and this is where I got stuck, was on the drive-thru.
Oh, I can't imagine why.
So
you're so. I remember you're so comfortable talking to strangers.
I spent many a weekend running the drive-thru cash register. So anyway, everyone at work made fun of me. They're like, "You bought a Nintendo?" instead of getting a
Well,
driver's license. And I'm like, I just walked here.
Listen.
It takes me 5 minutes to walk here.
Listen, in fairness, I think you may have had some idea of what your car was going to be. And so you were probably like, yeah, that can wait. I'm going to buy a Nintendo.
The gold Pontiac staring him down.
Yes.
But I remember I came walking home up the backyard carrying the Nintendo. My brother was about to go fishing with my dad, and he saw that Nintendo, and he's like, nope, I'm staying home.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I got my Nintendo for Christmas one year. Mario, of course, was a big deal. And I had the system that came, with the Mario Duck Hunt dual cartridge.
Yeah, that's the one we had.
And
with the light gun.
Yeah.
Which I played like maybe twice.
Yeah. Although I think, looking back, Contra was probably one of my favorites.
No way. You can't. Contra was it, man.
Up,
I mean,
down,
you were
down,
bored.
left, right.
You didn't have anything to do. I'll play some Contra.
Yeah, I know. You got to get the 30 lives, though, right at the front. You got to get the 30 lives.
Yeah, because without the 30 lives, you're
it's
you're
over.
done.
Yeah, and playing with somebody was a mixed bag because, they could
especially on the waterfall.
Yeah, they could hold you up. Like, if they stopped at the edge of the screen, you would just, jump into the abyss and be like,
well, the worst was the
dude.
waterfall when you're jumping up, and you would see them do that where they would just go up higher than you, and they'd be spinning around in a circle, and you knew, they're dead.
Yeah.
Because it was like they would kick you back up real quick before plummeting you down.
Yeah,
into
that's
the abyss.
But Contra, man. And the funny thing, look at the cover art of Contra, and it is simply painted over artwork from Predator. The blonde guy on the Contra cover is Arnold Schwarzenegger from Predator.
No, that's funny. I found, and I'll show you this, I'll post a picture of it. My father, back when he used to work for PepsiCo, for Pepsi, back when I was a kid, he had to travel all over the place, and he traveled to Japan a lot. And he brought me back this game, this little handheld game. It was probably only about 6 inches across. Real thin, had one of those old disc batteries in it. And it was a Popeye game. And all Popeye was this little, figure. It had 2 buttons, and you go, left or right, and you try and catch fruit that Pluto or Bluto, whatever his name was, was throwing at you. And it was just, a very simple kind of graphic game. And I got this maybe in 1982. You just go back and forth, it had, sounds and stuff. And I think it had a clock and an alarm on it. It was, one of those kind of things. And I found it not long ago, and it said Nintendo on the bottom. So it was a Nintendo game from 1981 or 1982. That's what they were making. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Do you remember the handheld football game?
Yeah.
It was just the little red dots.
Yeah, the dots.
Oh, yeah.
Man, I spent hours playing that game trying to get past those 2 red dots.
But no, it's amazing the evolution of where these companies took their products.
Remember when the Game Boy came out? That was pretty... I remember it was the same kid who had the 2600. They got the Game Boy and they brought it over, and I was always used to those crappy, it was just one screen that your guy did the same moves on because that's all that they had the movements on. And I was playing that Mario game, and it was like a full-on video game. I was like, this is amazing. It was like had more than one level, and that was a big moment in gaming, is when they released that Game Boy.
But it's funny to think about it. The technology, of course, is interesting at the time, but when you think about graphics and how big games got and how complicated they got, if you look at that evolutionary kind of spike, it's amazing how fast it took off. Once you hit the mid 90s and 64-bit systems started to emerge and real powerful home systems were finally available. What games did and what was available to kids changed the whole game again. It was just amazing, and it's still going through the roof. It's amazing, and it's funny to think that we are probably the last generation to not just become video game fanatics as kids, but also still had their traditional kind of toys and outdoor activities. Not that kids don't do that now, but the level of time spent in front of devices, the level of time spent in front of games now, versus back when we were kids, is just exponentially higher. And it's just amazing to think on how much of a hold the video game industry, not just consoles, but computers as well, have really taken over childhood for kids. It's just unbelievable.
Well, I will say this. kids will never know what it's like to have dang 3 men and 4 continues.
Yeah.
You ever go back and try to play those games?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I've gone back and played games,
It's-
and I'm like, I should be in a mental asylum
Yeah.
after playing that game.
Uh-huh.
Because I bought Bionic Commando in the early 2000s. I bought it in St. Pete, and I was with my soon-to-be future wife, and I was like, oh, I love this game when I was a kid. And I took it home, and I put it in, I still had like a Nintendo, because I bought like a Nintendo cartridge that's what they sold. And I put it in there, and I was like, wow, how did I do this? I mean,
it's hard.
It was infuriating.
You know what? I think it'd be a fun project if you didn't grow up with one of these Atari consoles. There are some amazing emulators on the internet that you can download, and take a moment and get an emulator and play games like Dig Dug. Play games like Q*bert. Go back and play Pitfall and enjoy how simple games used to be and enjoy how fun playing these games really were. And it was just having fun, and it was just a simple game, and you can spend hours doing it. And you should do it. You should go out there and find an emulator if you've never played these games. If you're just too young to be in that wave, you should go back and try it out, because it's really a fun experience.
Well,
Learn your history.
yeah, learn your history, youngsters. But before we sign off here, I did take my daughter to the Replay Museum, which is an arcade here. It's a free. You pay a flat fee, and you can play all these old arcade games all day long if you want to. And my daughter was done with that in about half an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we were at that sweet spot, like where we can understand and appreciate how cool that stuff was.
And it was all we had.
But looking back, someone who is, my daughter's age or younger, they will think we are crazy people. Because I went to Replay Museum last week, and I played Burger Time, and I got like legit anxiety, stressed out playing Burger Time. Those games are hard. They require hand-eye coordination and skill. And Tron, don't get me started on Tron.
Tron was impossible. It always
But it was fun.
It was fun.
Oh, but it was one of the funnest arcade games
I
I've ever
always
played.
loved playing it, but I sucked at it.
And everyone sucked at Tron.
And I continue to suck to this day.
Hey, do you remember that game show that was on TBS?
Starcade.
This is Starcade, TV's first video arcade game show.
That guy who looked like he could have cared less about. Well,
he's like,
okay, well, I watch it. Take a crack at it.
If they really,
hopefully, you'll win.
If the players really were terrible, he'd be like, "Well, I tell you what, you should have done there," and he'd just read off whatever he'd been told to read.
Well, I'm glad to see you back here. You didn't play well enough to win, but you were here and you're a champion, and that means you get something really good.
Starcade. Look it up. It's on all over YouTube. It's awesome.
Well, gosh, guys, this was fun. I mean, I really like going back.
Yeah. Hey, and I got to say, sorry if you were looking for the definitive history of video games. That is certainly not what this was.
And, we're not hardcore gamers either. We just, we grew up.
not.
We were the first to grow up with these consoles, and it's just such a fun memory.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you found something of use from our bantering.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to YouTube some of these video games. Impossible Mission. I'm going to find Impossible Mission.
Yeah.
I didn't
Stay a while.
Stay forever.
And his scream. Yeah, it's really great.
Throw some comments down. Let us know what games you guys grew up playing.
All right.
Let us know what system
Arkham Asylum.
If you'll excuse me, gang, I've got to go ram a light cycle into a light wall.
After 2 seconds of playing.
Exactly. Well, we've made it across the crocodile pit, through the quicksand, and over the scorpions and snakes, and we've arrived at the end of episode 4.
And as always, here on the Hyperspace, we will take you down our memory lane and hope you enjoy the ride.
And remember, you can always find us here on channel 3 or 4 in the 25th century.
You know you can't live without this content, so subscribe to the Hyperspace, podcasting in the 25th century. Follow us on social media, leave us a review, and join us here next time as we take you into the 25th century.